Hello and welcome back to MIT iGEM's podcast. The whole team is here today with your hosts being Allison, Janie, and Katie. For our second episode, we are speaking with Dr. Zimmers, a professor of cell, developmental, and cancer biology at the Oregon Health and Science University School of Medicine. Her research uses novel animal models and patient data to identify molecular, cellular, and organ system mechanisms leading to cachexia. Her findings focus on the role of IL-6 GP130 STAT3 pathway and other notable proteins in the overall characterization of cachexia. Dr. Zimmers is a leading advocate for cachexia research and has served in various leadership roles for cancer and cachexia-related groups, including as president of the Cancer Cachexia Society. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Dr. Zimmers.
It's my great pleasure.
Yeah, so just to jump into our first question, we are wondering what experiences have led you to dedicate your research and career to cancer cachexia.
So I was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins University and in the laboratory of Sergeant Lee. And he cloned a number of new TGF-beta family members. One of those TGF-beta family members was myostatin. So myostatin actually regulates muscle growth. So animals that have too little myostatin, including humans, cows, dogs, pigs, have a hypermuscular phenotype. And I did a different experiment where we overexpressed myostatin and the mice got very wasted. And so there was a surgery resident doing a research rotation in the lab, and he said, that looks like cachexia. And everybody in the lab said, what's cachexia? And so that's how I began studying cachexia. So it started just looking at the basic sort of syndrome of cachexia that occurs across many different diseases, and then evolved into a focus on cancer. And interestingly enough, I actually married the guy who said this is cachexia, Lenny Koniaris. He's a surgical oncologist, and we've collaborated on this our entire career.
Super interesting. We have previously spoken to Dr. Ishan Roy, and it's really interesting how y'all experts end up focusing your careers on cachexia and how many different pathways can all bring you to the same motivation as well as passion for researching cancer cachexia. So the next question that we have for you is, what was the most surprising or interesting discovery your lab made about cancer cachexia, in your opinion?
Surprising. So one of the more interesting things that I've been thinking about lately is what is it about either tumors or the people in which the tumors arise drives the phenotype of cachexia. So, cachexia is heterogeneous. So there's more likely to be cachexia in diseases of, say, upper GI cancers like esophageal, gastric, pancreatic, hepatobiliary, than other types of cancer like breast or prostate, for example. But even within certain diagnoses like non-small cell lung cancer, only half of people with that disease actually experience cachexia. And so we were trying to use that heterogeneity in presentation to understand mechanisms. And so in pancreatic cancer in particular, only about 30% of people don't experience cachexia. And so what we decided to do is to ask, is that a tumor-specific phenomenon or is that a person-specific phenomenon? And it turns out, as you were probably not surprised to learn, that it's both. And that if we take tumors from patients who have experienced a high degree of cachexia and implant them into mice, that phenotype carries over into the mouse model. So a high cachexia producing tumor in a person will produce cachexia in a mouse, and a low cachexia tumor in a person will produce less cachexia in a mouse. And actually the correlation coefficient for that was about 0.8. So it was really very strongly correlated with the patient's phenotype. And I thought the strength of that correlation was really surprising. So it turns out it's not just the tumor, though, that there are host features of the genome and of sex and body condition and age that also dictate cachexia heterogeneity. But I found the strength of that association to be one of the most surprising things I've seen in my career.
Speaking of heterogeneity, The last time we spoke with you, you mentioned that there are differences between how people of different sexes experience cachexia. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on some of these differences and how that and what implications it brings to the table.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to. So, in pancreatic cancer in particular, there seems to be pronounced sex differences, both in our animal models and in the evidence from patients, such that men seem to lose much more muscle mass than women, and they lose it more quickly. So they present in a more severe state of cachexia, and then that seems to progress more rapidly and more severely. If we look at gene expression in tissues from patients with early stage pancreatic cancer where they're getting surgery for their disease, and we look at expression in muscle and fat and blood, there are definitely sex specific pathways and genes that are found in each. And even within a pathway that is implicated in both sexes, the actual genes that are regulated in those pathways are regulated in a sex specific fashion. So I think the implications there are that we will need to be mindful of clinical trial design and make sure that they're powered to detect sex differences, which is difficult because it's hard to run it's difficult and expensive to run trials, and then to have to stratify them by sex adds a level of complexity and expense. But that it's also an opportunity that we could find potentially sex-specific pathways and intervene in a more precise manner. So bringing precision medicine approach to cancer cachexia maybe starts first with considerations of sex.
Yeah, of course. Definitely, like, even beyond cachexia in general, many diseases have this issue where different sexes are not like accounted for, and studies don't stratify for that. So, especially in cachexia, I know we've been seeing that a lot of the patient and like clinical data has been primarily male centered, and so that's something we've been thinking about in terms of how we approach our project and the impact that it'll have on patients. Is like whether it'll actually be beneficial for everyone, or if it'll maybe be more beneficial on men just because the data that we're using comes from that. So I think it's really important to be mindful of that, as you were saying. And kind of on that same um, sentiment of like mindfulness and these sort of social challenges, what are some of the biggest scientific and social challenges when it comes to cancer cachexia research just in general?
Oh, there are so many challenges in this field. First of all, there's sort of a general lack of awareness of the condition. So many patients, family members have told us that no one ever told them this word. No one ever explained that cachexia was sort of um, a feature of the disease itself, and they might have had very many conflicts with their loved one over eating, for example, not understanding that the tumor is actually reducing the person's appetite, right? So I think there's a general lack of awareness among the general public. There's actually lack of awareness among medical caregivers. A lot of them never speak to their patients about cachexia, never understood the term. And then, there's a lack of clinical treatments right now. We're working really hard to rectify that, we, the collective cancer cachexia community. But the challenges still remain. It's considered sort of niche research a bit by cancer researchers. We very often in the old days would get the kind of flippant reply that if you cure cancer, there will be no cachexia. So studying cachexia is not important, but we know that cancer is many diseases and it's difficult to cure. And all the preclinical data suggests that if you can treat the cachexia, people will do better. So changing that mindset has been a bit of a challenge. There's more awareness now among funders and among researchers. So the outlook is much more positive now, but it's still a very small group of researchers worldwide working on this question. So the community needs to grow. The understanding needs to grow. The effort needs to grow. The investment needs to grow. There are currently about 67 interventional trials for cancer cachexia, and there have been about a little over 200 altogether. The pace of that has increased dramatically. But you consider that there have been almost 8,000 trials for lung cancer to get to the point where we really have seen transformational change in lung cancer treatment. So we have a long way to go for cachexia. I'm hoping it doesn't take 8,000 trials. I think that we're very close to seeing some results in some trials that are ongoing now. But, there's a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. I also think it's when we were discussing the sex differences, it also harkens to me a greater study of what kinds of patients are, which kinds of patients have access to clinical trials, or which kinds of patients um, have these doctors who are willing to speak to them about cachexia, and if there happens to be any kind of discrimination or bias towards like which groups of people have access to better treatment and better care, and if that creates a kind of disparity between who gets treated for um, their cancer, who gets treated for cachexia. So moving forward, I also think because I personally am also really inspired by how Dr. Ishan Roy brings the a very like culturally competent way of treating cachexia into his work. Because of that, I think it's beyond imperative for our continued research to consider other aspects of a patient's identity and how that might impact the their livelihood moving forward. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, but
but I comment. Yeah, I think those are outstanding points. Um, it is true that in clinical trials in general, yeah, that's dominated by um, probably um, better resource people, generally white participants. We do know from emerging data from Florida and from Alabama and Virginia that there is a racial disparity in cachexia presentation, where Black and African American persons tend to have more severe cachexia. There is, I think, an strong effort in those places to address that issue of racial disparities and maybe underlying biological mechanisms as well as social determinants, of health and cancer outcomes. So we are definitely mindful of that and are working to build, greater, in every interaction that I've been involved with academically, um, bringing greater equity to participation in clinical trials, to access to the best possible care, and into bringing that understanding of potential biological differences to bear on our research into mechanisms. So that's an excellent point.
and we know that like you to contribute to these efforts, you co-founded and currently lead the Cancer Cachexia Society. So could you tell us a little bit more about this group, and how it is increasing awareness and supporting cachexia patients?
Yes, absolutely. I would love to, because it's actually been an incredible experience doing this. So Dennis Guttridge at Medical University of South Carolina um, has long been a leader in our field, and he started a series of cancer cachexia conferences back in 2012. And I was involved in organizing all but one of those. And we actually started the society at first to protect that conference and to make sure that it was able to go on. Um, but what it has evolved into is much more than that. So we have an international reach. Our board hails from many continents: North America, South America, Europe, Australia. We have hundreds of members. Our mission has grown to include an educational seminar series that we have monthly, as well as this conference that we have every 2 years or so. We also have participated in patient advocacy. So we have a chair for that, Martin Kochansik, who runs Reddit and Facebook groups called the Cachexia Network, where patients talk about their experiences, and caregivers find information and share advice. We have an incipient clinical trials network and clinical trials advisory board, where we will be taking trials and trial designs and helping investigators and companies refine their trial designs to have the most robust and most impactful trials. So we are working at many levels, from the basic cell biology all the way through phase 2 and 3 clinical trials to advance the mission. Um, and, we would really welcome participation at all levels, including yourselves. There's a membership for students as well. So I think that I'm going to be turning over the presidency to Andrew Judge from University of Florida later this year. But I think there's been tremendous growth in the society. We have a lot of really exciting ongoing efforts, collaborative efforts to advance research and education. And, I think it's really going to go on to do really good things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's amazing, like how much the society has done and how, passionate everyone part of it is about cachexia research, even though it's so understudied. Like you clearly have done so much to spread the message and encourage research in that area. And we're all very, very impressed and very excited about that.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's amazing. But beyond the society itself and like the Reddit and Facebook groups that you had talked about, what are some other resources that you would recommend to help people better understand cachexia?
Yeah, so if someone's interested in the clinical aspect, or they're personally interested because they're a family member or suffering through that, obviously they should go to their physician. But there are also online resources from the American Society of Clinical Oncology, for example, that has some guidelines. If you look at some of the European organizations that focus on nutrition or cancer, Europe has long led in this area, and actually Japan as well. So there are lots of clinical resources online and recommendations. Some of those recommendations go farther than the American Society of Clinical Oncology recommendations, which currently really only recommend nutritional counseling. So from a clinical perspective, that's available. NCI recently updated their article about cancer cachexia, but we really are also trying to work to fill this knowledge gap ourselves and try to generate patient-facing material for caregivers as well. All of this is actually being accelerated by some clinical trials in this space, which are going to require that people are aware of their condition and that their physicians are aware of their condition, and that there might be opportunities for treatment in the future.
Absolutely. And on that same note, I'm curious regarding how cachexia is currently understudied and underfunded in comparison to other forms of cancer research. How can the layperson, like the average layperson, improve the awareness that the general population has towards cancer cachexia, or how can we as college students contribute towards the overall cachexia research that's going on?
Oh, those are really great questions. And that is really fantastic that you are interested in asking and participating in that way. I would say what we need to do is have at least in terms of society, have a mechanism for students to put their ideas forward so that we can listen to you when you tell us what you think the avenues are. You're clearly making headway with this podcast and with the project that you were doing, and it seems very self-initiated, and that's fantastic. We would love to highlight that and partner with you in that way. I was speaking with Joanna Watson at the National Cancer Institute, who is a branch chief in the Division of Cancer Biology. And one of her areas of responsibility is cancer cachexia. And one of the things she said is that we all, as researchers, need to keep speaking up. So speaking up to the different institutes at the NIH, we should tell them what we need. We could go to Capitol Hill, make sure representatives know what is needed. You probably know that Representative John Lewis passed away of pancreatic cancer. He clearly experienced cachexia prior to his death. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died with, pancreatic cancer. and cachexia. So they're aware of the condition, and there is precedent for legislative activity from the lay public to advancing the budgets and the focus of the NIH and even the Department of Defense congressionally mandated research programs to focus more on specific diseases as they are advocated for by citizens, including that's basically what happened with pancreatic cancer. There were multiple efforts at the level of Congress to advance funding in that space. So direct advocacy helps, and certainly the kinds of things that you were doing will certainly help spread the word. It's really a sophisticated question. And I think in part the word is difficult, right? Cachexia, it's a little bit intimidating. It's difficult to pronounce when you see it at first. But the more we normalize that and regularize that and talk about it, the more people will become engaged. And interestingly, at our upcoming conference, there will be a presentation on developing a lexicon for cancer cachexia. So how do we talk to lay people and patients and caregivers using language that's more readily understood and less technical? Maybe I can put you in touch with her.
Yeah, that would be so wonderful. Thank you. And finally, we would like to ask if you would like to share anything that we haven't necessarily asked you about, or if you have any other thoughts that we weren't able to get to today.
Well, I would say that I'm really impressed with your engagement on this topic and the new lens that you've brought to the subject matter, both the idea of synthetic biology, which I'm not aware of any other group working in that space in cachexia, so I think that's very impressive, and I am very hopeful of what you will find. And then this idea of this particular podcast that's dedicated to cachexia is probably unique, and so I think that's fantastic. And I would just say, keep the ideas coming and let us know what we should be doing better to get the word out, because you've made advances in places and in ways that we haven't. So kudos to you for that. And I hope you stay in touch.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Zimmers. We really enjoyed this conversation with you today.
Yeah, it's been a great pleasure.
And thank you for tuning in to MIT iGEM's podcast, episode 2, and we hope to see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye-bye.